Hi, I'm Dave with Commercial Coils, and in this video today we are going to show you how to get the dimensional sheet filled out on a chilled water coil. So to start us off, we're going to start up in the upper right hand corner, and the first thing that comes up is the tubing material. So on this particular coil, obviously has that shiny copper look to it, and on the tubes as well. If you need to, you can take a knife and kind of scrape it a little bit just to make sure that you are seeing copper. This coil here, it is definitely copper, so we're going to indicate that on this sheet. The next thing underneath that is our tube diameter. In the tube diameter here, what we're going to do is you can, if you know what it is, you can measure it with a tape measure and try and get as close as you can. The other thing that we do is we have this little cheat sheet. It has the little grooves in here so that you can then just take those grooves and then put it into the tube. Here, as you can see, the first one is a little loose, so it's definitely not 5/8. The 1/2 inch one goes right in real nice, and then the 3/8 one just won't go. So this tube is a 1/2 inch. So that's what I'm going to indicate here, is the 1/2 inch. As far as the thickness of the material of the tube, that's something we're going to be able to determine unless you cut into it, which I'm sure you don't want to do. So if you want to just indicate what you would like it to be, you can certainly do so on that part right here. The next up for materials is the fins. Typically you can use either aluminum or copper. We do also offer this in stainless steel, and then if that is the case, then you would just indicate it as such by writing it in. What we'll do on this coil here, as you can see, this material is aluminum, and it moves real easy, it flexes real nice, and it doesn't have that copper look. So in this case here, we're going to indicate that this coil has aluminum fins. And then once again, you can indicate it as well that it's aluminum fins with 1/2 inch tubes, and then we'll circle that. Moving on from that section there, we're going to start working on the dimensional area. First thing up is the quantity of coils. We have just one coil, so we'll put a 1. After that is determining the coil hand. In the photo here, you'll see that you can either choose right hand or left hand. And this particular coil, when I'm looking at it, I'm matching this coil up with my view on the drawing, and this connection is in the lower right hand corner, and then this connection is in the upper left hand corner. So according to my sheet, this is a right hand coil, which I can just write in here RH. Next item up is the tubes high. What we're asking for there is just that. How many tubes high does this coil have from top to bottom? And this coil here, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So on our sheet, we are going to put in here 20. After that, the next item up is tubes connected to the header. In this particular coil, again, what we're asking for is how many of these tubes are actually connected into your header. In this coil here, you can see all the tubes are connected into the header. With that being the case, I will then write in 20 into this box here, telling us that you have all 20 tubes connected to the header. Next item up are the number of rows. How many rows does this coil have? And you'll see on the sheet, it kind of gives you an example of 8, 6, 4, and 2. This particular coil, when we're looking at this, if you're looking down on the coil, you'll notice that it has 1, 2. So this coil only has 2 rows of tubes. So I'm going to indicate on that 2 rows. The next box item is the fins per inch. The best way to do the fins per inch is just kind of take your tape measure, bring it across the fins, okay? And I always like to start off with the 10-inch mark. So I'm just going to come here, and I'm going to count from 10 to 11 of how many fins I get. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this coil has 9 fins per inch. So we'll indicate that in that box. Next up is figuring out our A dimension. The A dimension is the fin height. The fin height is just that. How tall are these fins from here to there that is fitting inside of the casing? So on this particular coil, we'll measure it. And the fin height here is 25 inches. So we will indicate that on the A dimension, 25. Next up is our B dimension, the fin length. The fin length is just that. We only want the fins from the start to the finish. So we're going to measure from here to there. And on this coil, we have 32 inches. So we will write that in for our B dimension. Next up is CT and CB. CT is casing top, CB, casing bottom. So once again, we're going to measure that. And on this coil, it is 5/8 of an inch for CT. And for CB, it too is measuring 5/8 of an inch. So we will put that in for CB. Next item up is D and E. Per our drawing, this is E, this is D. So the first item up is the dimension D. We'll measure that, and it is 1.5 inches. That's our D dimension. Our E dimension is here. We'll measure that, and that is 1.5 inches as well. So we'll put that in for E. Next item up is the F dimension. The F dimension is the overall height of our casing from top to bottom. So we'll measure that. And on this coil, it measures out to be 26.25. So we'll put that in for F. And a quick, easy way to kind of double check yourself on that is if you take your A dimension plus CT and CB, it should equal your F dimension. Next item up is the G dimension. G is going to be the overall length of your casing from this end of the casing to this end of the casing. So we'll measure that. And on this coil, it's 35 inches. So that goes in for my G dimension. And once again, you can double check that dimension, because if you take D plus E and your B, should give you G. After G is the H dimension. The H dimension is how wide or how thick is this casing. Okay? So we'll measure that. And on this coil, it is 2 1/4. So we'll write 2 1/4 in for our H. Now, the I dimension is basically what the I dimension is. It's going to be from the absolute end of your coil, from this end, all the way out to your header end. Okay? So I know a lot of times you don't, if you have a really, really long coil, you can't just take a tape measure on there and you just can't run it from end to end. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to the I dimension once we completed some more of these on our sheet. The next up is our J dimension. The J dimension, as you can see on the drawing sheet, is going to ask you for how far out this is from here, of the end of your connection, to the face of your header. So we'll measure that. And that is, on this coil, 5.5 inches. That is our J dimension. Next item up is our L dimension. The L dimension is going to be from the casing face, which is the inside here, to the end of the header. We're going to get our tape measure in there. It's going to run it all the way to the face of that casing and measure that. And on this coil, we get 4.5 inches. That is our L dimension. Next up is our S dimension. Okay? As we already indicated, this is a right-hand coil, so we're looking at our dimensional sheet. This is our S. This is our R. So when I'm measuring this, I'm going to measure from the absolute bottom of the casing to the center of our coil. And once again, if I use my straight edge so that I can bring this out and then measure from here to there to the center of my connection. And then on this coil here, the S dimension is going to be right at 2 inches. So from the bottom of the casing to the center of our connection here for S is 2 inches. We're going to do the same thing for R. Again, I'm going to bring that casing out and I'm going to measure to the center of this connection. And on this coil, it is 5 inches. Next item up is the T dimension. Now the T dimension is on the back end of the coil, so we're going to turn this around so you can see. And what the T dimension is what we want to know is how far out is this return bend sticking out from the casing face. And on this coil here, it's 1.5 inches. So that's our T dimension. And the next item up is our X dimension. The X dimension is going to be from this edge here of your casing to the center of the header. Now in this coil, if you've noticed, the headers are actually wider than the casing. Most of the coils you'll come up with, the headers will be inside the casing. Okay? So on this particular coil, if we were measuring this coil, we would take this edge here, okay, break it out, and then measure to the center for that connection there, for the X. On this coil here, we have to be a little bit creative. We have to take the dimension from the edge of the header to the edge of the casing. And on this particular coil, I am measuring 1/2 inch from this edge here to this edge here. And then I will check it on the other side to see if I'm the same. So once again, I'm going to measure from here, this edge, to the edge of my casing. And then again, it too is 1/2 inch. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take that 1/2 inch and we're going to subtract once we determine what the outside of the dimensions of the two headers are. And once again, if you have a straight edge, you can just take your straight edge, put it up there, and then measure. And on this particular coil, from outside edge here to outside edge here is 3 3/4 inch. Now, we will use that in calculating the Z dimension, so I'm just going to make a note of it on our paper. Then what I can do next is determine the diameter of this header. Again, I can take my straight edge, come up against there, and then see what we've got. This header here is 1 5/8 diameter. And then I'll check the other one, make sure it too is 1 5/8. And then I'll check the other one, make sure it too is 1 5/8. and it too is 1 5/8. Now, what I can do to determine my X is I can take the 1 5/8, take half of that, and subtract the 1/2 inch, and that becomes my X dimension. The Z dimension is asking you for the center to center on your connections. And since we've already measured the outside of these two headers, of it being 3 3/4 of an inch, all we have to do is subtract 1 diameter from it to get our center to center. And so if we subtracted 1 5/8 from the 3 3/4, we will get 2 1/8. That on this coil is our Z dimension. And now to determine the I dimension, what we're going to do is you're going to come back to where the D dimension is. If D is sticking out further than your return bends, then you're going to use D plus B plus L will give you I. If your return bends are sticking out beyond this casing, you're going to use T plus B plus L, and that would give you your I dimension. On this particular coil, when we add those up, this coil comes out to be 38 inches. And now we're going to complete our connection portion of our sheet. On this coil, if you remember earlier, we took the diameter of this header, and this header diameter was 1 5/8 diameter. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this connection size is the same diameter for our header, and it is. So on this coil, this is our return connection. So on the return connection, the diameter of this is the same diameter as our header. And then on our supply connection, the diameter of this is also the same diameter of our supply, which is also 1 5/8. So on this coil, with it being 1 5/8, it will support an 1.5 inch connection for our supply and for our return. So what we will do is we will write in 1.5 inches for the supply and 1.5 inches for the return. And then the last portion we need to do is determine the type of fitting that's on here. On this coil here, we have an MPT. The threads are on the outside. Now if they were on the inside of this, it would be an FPT. And then if you had a different connection altogether, then you would just need to indicate it on our sheet. So in this particular case, this coil does have the connections on the outside, which is an MPT. So that's what we're going to indicate on our sheet. Once you've completed this, you can email it, fax it to us, take a photo of it, and get it to it just that way. Anytime if you have any questions, you can feel free to call our Commercial Coil 1-800 number, and we'll go over it with you as well.